Hi everyone, welcome to the Institut français. I am Isablle Manci, cultural attaché at the Institut français du Royaume-Uni. It is an honor and a pleasure for us to welcome this conversation at the Institut français tonight. The great artist, novelist and poet Barbara Chase-Riboud will discuss with Yesomi Umolu, curator of the exhibition at the Serpentine, and Ulrich, Obrist, artistic director of the Serpentine, will introduce the dialogue in a few minutes. A few words to say that we are delighted to host this conversation for a lot of reasons. First of all, we are happy because the Barbara Chase-Riboud exhibition is supported by the Fluxus Art Projects Fund, which is led by us, the Institut français du Royaume-Uni. Our artistic committee was very interested and very attentive to Hans Ulrich's new perspective on the work of Barbara. We're very keen to host this conversation because it is part of a new compagnonnage, a new partnership with the Serpentine that we launched together last July around programs in which we share a common interest and understanding. We're very proud because among the superb works presented in the exhibition, two were acquired in a visionary way by one of the most important and remarkable French public collections, the CNAP, Centre National des Arts Plastiques. Last but not least, Barbara is not yet there, but we are very happy and thrilled because the work of Barbara Chase-Riboud, who received the honorary of Aware, is absolutely extraordinary from the beginning and continuously till today. It contains audacious associations and contrasts that are never contradictions, and it embodies the vision and power of women. On these words, welcome again for Barbara, Yesomi, and Ulrich. I leave you the stage on this power woman. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Isabelle. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. And we are very grateful to the French Institute. Together with Bettina Korek, our CEO, and all our teams of the Serpentine, I'm so delighted to welcome you to an evening with Barbara Chase-Riboud, presented in collaboration here with the Institut français du Royaume-Uni, but also in collaboration with Princeton University Press. We always say the Serpentine and the Institut français is 1 + 1 = 11. Tonight we have to say the Serpentine, the Institut français, and the Princeton University Press are 1 + 1 + 1 = 111. We are very thrilled that you could join us for this very, very special occasion to celebrate Barbara's exhibition, Infinite Folds, at the Serpentine, as well as, of course, the release of her publication, I Always Knew, a memoir published by Princeton University Press. Koenig Bookstore, and we're very grateful as always to Claire, have a small bookshop here tonight, and it's possible afterwards to acquire the book. I want to thank again the Institute, as always, Isablle Manci, of course also Dragoslav Zakariev, who is the deputy director, for their warm hospitality. We've had so many years of collaboration with the Institut français. I remember we were here for a Nouveau Roman discussion with Alain Robbe-Grillet, also with Agnès Varda. So it is wonderful that tonight we can be here to celebrate the extraordinary one and only Barbara Chase-Riboud. We are incredibly excited at the Serpentine about this exhibition. Barbara is an artist, a novelist, a poet who has innovated across sculpture and literary forms throughout a 7-decade career. When Barbara was 16, MoMA acquired already the first work for their collection. Ever since, Barbara has done what Zaha Hadid always said, there is no end to experimentation. Barbara creates forms that, in her own words, not only relate to an art of the oxymoron, skillfully combining opposites, but also reversing and upsetting the established order and hierarchy parts as only a true revolutionary does. And we are here tonight to celebrate the true revolutionary Barbara is. And there are, of course, so many dimensions to the practice I mentioned already. Of course, the sculpture, the visual art, also the extraordinary drawings. But of course, there are also the novels, the books. And many books from Sally Hemings to today. It's Toni Morrison who initially encouraged Barbara to write. There's also the poetry from an early illustration of Rimbaud, A Season in Hell, to more recently a very fascinating connection between Anna Akhmatova and Amedeo Modigliani. There is, of course, the connection to cinema. Barbara worked in the Cinecittà context in Italy. There is public art. Meta Mondrian is a great example for the many public sculptures of Barbara. And of course, the very first time I heard about Barbara's work was actually through a Swiss friend, the late photographer René Bourri, who was a Magnum photographer. So that's yet another connection, the connection to photography. And when we ask Barbara what connects all these different dimensions of the practice, she told us that it's really memory. She says memory is everything. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about this tonight, also in relation to the extraordinary Memoir, which is really a very, very urgent book. I want to thank here, first of all, of course, Barbara for everything, for the amazing dialogue of almost 10 years now. I want to thank Yesomi Umolu, Director of Curatorial Affairs and Public Practice at the Serpentine, and Chris Bailey, Assistant Curator, for their work on the amazing show, open now at the Serpentine. If you've not done so already, I very much urge you to visit the exhibition, and we should give Yesomi and Chris a very big round of applause. I also want to take the opportunity to give a very special thank you to Erin Genoa Gilbert, who is Director of Exhibitions, Publications, and Acquisitions, and also Chief of Staff of Barbara Chase-Riboud, and has been absolutely instrumental in helping us to realize this incredible show. I want to ask you all to give a big round of applause to Erin as well. I wanted to also give a very, very special thank you to Lynette Yadom-Boakye, our trustee at the Serpentine, the extraordinary artist who for so many years has told us about Barbara and has encouraged us 10 years ago to actually visit Barbara's studio. None of this would happen without Lynette. A big round of applause. I also want to express special gratitude to Carrie Mae Weems, who actually has as well given us so much insight into Barbara's work, the artists, and of course I want to mention all our partners who made the exhibition possible, the headline partners, the Ford Foundation. Darren Walker has to be thanked here for the incredible support. I want to thank Asom Grant, Fluxus Art Projects also, our advisors Ecom, Weil, and Gallo Glass, and of course, as always, our chairman Mike Bloomberg, also Patty Harris, Jean-Marie Bloomberg, Philanthropies, and as well also the Barbara Chase-Riboud Supporter Circle, who really made this exhibition possible. Very special thanks go to Kostas Sasinopoulos, Associate Curator, Live Programs, Halime Özdemir, Production Manager, Eva Specht, Curatorial Assistant, Bea Redovic, Production Coordinator, the whole Serpentine Dream Team. Please give them a big round of applause. And it's really an incredible honor to have Barbara here with us tonight in conversation with Yesomi Umolu, Director of Curatorial Affairs and Public Practice. So without further ado, please join me in giving a very, very warm welcome to Barbara and to Somi.
Good evening and welcome. And really thank you for joining us this evening. It's an absolute pleasure to be sharing the stage with Barbara on the occasion of her exhibition Infinite Folds at Serpentine, as well as the recent release of the publication I Always Knew a Memoir, which is published by Princeton University Press. Barbara, if you allow me, I'm going to just say a few words about who you are and your career, which is full of many, many great achievements. So Barbara has a renowned presence in the art world, and her work is held in museum collections internationally. She's also an award-winning poet, a best-selling novelist, and is the recipient of many prizes and awards, including the French Legion d'Honneur in 2022. In addition to the exhibition at Serpentine, Barbara also has a major exhibition currently on view at the Pulitzer Arts Foundation in St. Louis, Missouri. Barbara, you were born in 1939 in Philadelphia, and you spent a year at the American Academy in Rome in 1957 before returning to the US to study at Yale's School of Design and Architecture. And then you returned to Europe, traveling extensively, and have lived in Paris since 1960, and Paris being the center of an artistic, literary, and political circles in Europe and beyond. About the Serpentine show, we're really honored to present this exhibition, and it features over 30 works dating from the 1960s to the present day. And it is Barbara's first institutional solo show in the UK. And it features sculptures and works on paper, which in my view are beautiful, monumental, and poignant. And they speak to Barbara's artistic vision, which features a sort of vibrant transnationalism and also an interdisciplinary practice. Personally, Barbara, I want to thank you because it's been a career highlight to work with you and your team on presenting this exhibition, and I'm so excited to talk more with you this evening. For all you guys out there, the exhibition is open and runs until the end of January 2023. So really, I encourage you to see it, and if you haven't had the opportunity to do so already. Also, at the end of the talk, there will be the opportunity to purchase a copy of I Always Knew, which I believe is signed by Barbara, which is going to be a very special keepsake. So, Barbara, we have some images here on the screen that are just going to help us and guide us through this conversation. And I wondered if maybe we could start by you talking about the memoir.
This is an accidental memoir that I didn't know I was writing at the time, and has emerged as a kind of, as a kind of retrospective of retrospective. It's absolutely, unheard of that an artist has two retrospectives at the same time that cross the Atlantic Ocean, one in the US and one in London. And this is the record of the retrospective. And so it combines visual, art and literature at the same time. I didn't know I was doing this, and I didn't plan to do it. What happened was that when my mother died, I found in her possessions a small metal box that was full of airmail letters. And at the time, I thought this might be some kind of secret life, some kind of Pandoric box I was looking at, and I did not open it. I saw that they were full. It was full of letters, and it wasn't until 8 years later that I finally opened, the box, and I realized that they were love letters. They were love letters from me to her over 30 years of correspondence when I was in Europe and she was in Philadelphia. And so this correspondence suddenly took a whole other meaning and a whole other significance in what I was doing. And I had these were just letters to my mom. I had no pretensions of being a writer or doing a diary or making a memoir. I was just writing to her to tell her, what was happening to me. And she kept every single letter. There were 600 of them. And at this point, I decided that I would transcribe them and that I would put them in chronological order. And I left them another 5 or 6 years in that state until this retrospective came along. And when this retrospective came along, I gave the transcript of the letters in chronological order to the director of the Pulitzer Museum as a kind of, reference book for my career in Europe and for the retrospective. She, without telling me, sent them to Princeton University Press. And Princeton University Press decided that this was a memoir. And we decided to publish I Always Knew. That's the story.
What a beautiful story, one of many. One of many beautiful stories I'm sure we're going to hear tonight. I just wondered if you could tell us why you left the US very early on.
Why did I leave for the US? That is the silliest question I've ever heard. I didn't leave the US. I went to Europe. The first time I went to Europe was in '58 when I won a John Hay Whitney fellowship to the American Academy in Rome. So I had already experienced Europe. I had already experienced being alone in the world, and that was what I found normal, and so when I left Yale in '60. I had all intentions of living and loving in England. And then a lot of other things happened in life, and I ended up going to Paris for the weekend. And I never left. Life took over. I married, I had a family, I had, I had a life of constant travel, constant, sort of surprises and constant influences from all over the world, because I happened to marry a magnum photographer who did this as a living. So the next few years I spent traveling around the world, and traveling around the world in places that most Americans never dream of or never think of or never go. And this is why in '65, I was the first American woman to be invited to the Republic of China as a guest. And so this whole world opened up to me, and it was marvelous. Okay.
Amazing, thank you. Could you tell us what you learned from those travels? What you learned from your time in China? I'm just interested how your travels informed your work and what you were seeing and experiencing there.
You're going to have to put it on the screen.
Yeah, can we move to someone?
Because these are pictures of me in Peking in '65. If you go back this is the Forbidden City, the way it looked in 1965, empty. And is there another? Is there?
More images. Yeah, this is you.
And this is the Forbidden City at a banquet for Chairman Mao, in which I was the only woman in the room. It was for the delegates for the May 1st celebration, and there I am sitting in my white Chanel suit, which Mark said, "Don't bring any skirts. Nobody wears skirts here. It's just pants." But I didn't listen to him. And this was a banquet of 17 services for 5,000 people. So I can say I had dinner with Mel and 5,000 other people. This is also Peking. This was my Chinese. This was my Chinese uniform, and this is the park of the Forbidden City, and I am surrounded by a very sweet military, Chinese military, and who had a very good time trying to figure out who the hell I was. This goes forward to the end of the 60s. It was an exhibition, one of my first exhibitions in New York, at the Air France Gallery in New York. And it was, if you can see in one corner, they were the first Malcolms. They were the Malcolms that were not stealths, but they were low on the floor. They were practically floor pieces. This is Pont-Levoix. This is the Loire Chair in France. And this is my atelier.
There's another great picture coming up.
This also is my atelier and my 4-year-old boy.
Who may be in the audience today, maybe.
In 67, 68.
Can we pause on this picture, Barbara? Because I want to talk a little bit more about this work, which actually there's a version of this work. This is Bathers.
Yes.
And there's a version of Bathers in the exhibition at Serpentine.
Yes, this is the first version of Bathers. There are 3 versions, and one is in the exhibition here.
Could we talk about how you're working with sculpture here?
Well, these sculptures were part of a suite of aluminum sculptures, which I call white sculptures, which are sand casting rather than lost wax, so that it is possible to repeat the forms if you do not go very far into the surface, so that you can repeat forms and you can you can manage the forms in a different way.
And the fiber elements, if you could maybe talk us through how you're working in fiber in these works.
The aluminums the first aluminums did not have fiber, but they did have cords and sort of ribbons that could be manipulated and knotted and so on and so forth. It was almost the beginning of the Malcolm cells with the cords, but not quite. These were 65, 68, 69. And then when I made the big leap, it was 69 when I decided that I had to get rid of the legs of my sculptures. I had to get rid of the base of my sculptures, and I could no longer hang them on the wall as well. And so this is Malcolm 3.
Could you tell us a little bit more about Malcolm? Because you keep referring to Malcolms. For those who don't know about Malcolm, can you tell us about the series on Malcolm?
Well, they began in '69. And Malcolm was assassinated in '68. And with his assassination came a kind of explosion in my own work, simply because I needed desperately to get these forms, which were turning into abstractions, off the floor, off the base, and vertical. Mm-hmm. And so that was how it all began.
Thank you. Should we move to the next slide? So this is Malcolm number 2. The first black Malcolm. The other Malcolms were polished bronze, and this is patina bronze, black, and it's black. And as you can see, it's completely abstract, and it's floating on a skirt of black wool, which seems to be holding it up, which is an impossibility. And could you, I know that obviously Malcolm and his death was a very significant moment for you. Can you tell us why you were inspired to dedicate these works to Malcolm? What inspired you?
I dedicated the works to Malcolm after the fact, and because of the assassination. I was outraged, I was desperate, and I knew that I wanted a memorial to him, and something that fit into my own perspective. And you know, it resulted in a series of sculptures, of 20 or 21 sculptures that I call stels.
Thank you.
This is my mom. This is La Carrel in the south of France, near Macon, near Lyon, really, in the wine country of the chateau of the Riboud family, of which I was a member for 20 years. This was one of her first visits to France. This is my atelier in Paris, one of my first ateliers in Paris. And as you can see, I work on tables or on the floor. And these sculptures were practically all aluminum white sculptures. I had not a sort of, well, I had come beyond the bone sculptures, which you don't have photographs of.
We do.
Because of the leg problem. But this is another atelier of mine, Rue du Taux, which was an old an old postcard factory, in which I used the ribbons and refractions, but in aluminum and in woven aluminum.
When did you arrive at bronze then, as a?
These are the beginning of the stels and sort of the beginning also of the Malcolms. This is my atelier in Italy, and these are my foundry men. This is well, I don't have to introduce who it is. This is where I made this big turnaround in my life and in my work, in that this is the beginning of the historical novels, Sally Hemings and the President's Daughter, that Jacqueline Onassis was the editor and the acquiring editor. And it's a long, long story that began in Scorpios when we visited her, and I sat on the beach and told her the story of Sally Hemings, told her also that my editor, Toni Morrison, had thrown up her hands in despair because nobody wanted an epic poem about an enslaved girl during the French Revolution, which was what I was going to do with Sally Hemings. And finally, she is the one who said to Barbara, you know, I said, you know, I can't do this. I'm a poet, I'm a splinter, you know. I do acrobats, but to sit down and write, you know, a 600-page historical novel, I mean, I don't know how to do that. And finally, she convinced me. She said, you've got to write this book, Barbara. And finally, when I had the book, she called my agent, and she kept calling and saying, has Barbara finished this book? Has Barbara finished this book? And finally, when I had the pages, she bought the book for Viking, and the rest is history. Okay.
So I think the book, Sally Hemings, as well as the sculptures dedicated to Malcolm, speak to your interest in memory and history. And I've started to thinking about you, Barbara, as a public historian. Could you talk a little bit more about why you were so committed to reframing history in your sculptures and your writing?
Well, it's like this accidental memoir. It was an accidental novel. I had no intentions of writing another novel. This was supposed to be it. And then I decided I ought to write another novel just to prove that this was not a fluke. And so one thing led to another. And I am now on novel number 6.
And why Sally Hemings?
Because I found the story. I found the historical proof, as far as I was concerned, that she existed. Her biography, as far as American history was concerned, was 1, she never existed. 2, she was some kind of plaything for Jefferson. 3, her children were not his. 4, etc. And so I had to invent. There was very little, there was no documentation. There was simply a long newspaper article and the memoir of Madison Hemings, one of her sons. That's all there was. And I went back and found, and found documentation and found that it was a true story, a historic story. And this woman played a role in American history which was, unheard of. And I thought to myself, I've got to do this for the sake of history and for the sake of truth, because there were just too many lies. And there are too many lies in American history, as we all know. And so little by little, And so little by little, they have got to be excavated, you know. And for instance, it's so silly in a way. Monticello has decided that they're going to embrace the idea of Sally Hemings. So what do? They dig up, you know, they do an archaeological dig, and they find that Sally Hemings's room, and she was supposed to be a secret mistress, was in the middle of the Monticello kitchen. Mm-hmm. Now, anybody with a brain knows that if there is a room in brick with no windows in the middle of a kitchen, it is the bread oven. It is the place where they have to produce every day for a population of maybe 200, 300 people, between the slaves, the family, and whatever. So of course there's an oven in the middle of you know, the kitchen, and they're calling it Sally Hemings's room. Mm. And it just never ends. It never ends, and it gets more ridiculous as we go on, as we know. And so now we have 1619, and we have another kind of milestone that we have to cope with. So we'll come back to that later. This is Rue de Plante. This is another atelier of mine, which is probably my most beautiful, you know, the Art Deco building atelier in Paris. Mm. And as you can see here, there's a Zanzibar, and there is a Malcolm, and there is also Cleopatra's chair.
Can you talk about how you put these works together? Of course, these are highly intricate and very monumental works. And I'm just curious about how you're working in the studio when you compose your sculptures. If you can give us some detail on those.
Well, when I compose my sculptures, there's always the surprise when I attach the silk and the fibers to the bronze, because there's a transformation that takes place which is magical. And the bronze takes on all the characteristics of the silk, and the silk takes on the characteristics of the bronze. And so there's this inversion of power, which is fascinating.
So this is here an image of Confessions for Myself, which is actually on view at the Serpentine. Do you want to talk us through this work? Because one of the early bronze pieces.
This is at the Serpentine.
Yeah.
This is called Confessions for Myself. I've forgotten the date. I think it's
72.
72. It's black bronze, which is patinaed, and it is awesome. It's very big, it's very powerful, and it's one of the first sculptures that takes on this idea of transference and power transference. And of course, these are early sculptures. They're bone sculptures. They're during my Giacometti surrealist epoch, which was in the 60s, in the late 50s and the 60s. This is Adam and Eve, angel walking. And in the background, Nostradamus and Maître Mondrian.
So these were produced in the late 50s, early 60s. And I'm just curious, because you mentioned Giacometti and the Surrealists were great influences to you. Can you talk about how you kind of encountered these movements in Paris, in terms of your circle of friends, or how you kind of, what were you reading, what were you looking at that brought you to some of these ideas?
Giacometti was at his most powerful when I arrived in Paris, and by a fluke which had nothing to do with art, my husband left for Vietnam. He was, you know, his first mentor was Cartier-Bresson, and he told Cartier-Bresson, listen, you know, I have to leave my newlywed wife, and you've got to take care of her because she doesn't speak one word of French. And so he, as a kind of excursion, he took me to Giacometti's atelier in Paris. And that was the first time I met him face to face.
Did you meet any of the other surrealists? Did you meet Man Ray or others in Paris?
Man Ray, yes, all the surrealists, Max Ernst, and above all, Sandy Calder, who was my neighbor in the country. I lived in Pont-de-Voix, he lived in Sachet, which were just a few miles from one another.
And this is an image of bathers again.
This is the bathers in all its glory, presented as it should be. And this is aluminum. This is aluminum sand casting.
Yeah. Thank you.
This is a Zanzibar that was cast at the Royal Academy of
College
Art
of
here
Art.
in London.
College of Art.
Was cast here. The Zanzibars is another series which have the sort of combination of silk and bronze, and also have their vertical ones that are very big, and then there are smaller ones that I call Zanzibar tables, which are also combinations of silk and bronze, but they are flat, and they go on the floor. We're back to, that's Malcolm II. In the background, that is Numéro Noir, Numéro Rouge Noir. And there's a pyramid. I think there's an obelisk in the background.
So these are in the exhibition. We have a gallery that pairs the Malcolm series with the monument drawings.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you tell us about the monument drawings, please?
Oh, the monument drawings was a series of drawings that I did for an exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York as a kind of argument against Anthony Jansen, who insisted that my poetry had something to do with my drawings, and I insisted that my drawings had nothing to do with my poetry, that they were two different things. And he said, well, what about the automatic writing? And I said, the automatic writing is a third thing that has nothing to do with the two other things. And so, as a kind of joke, I began, it took me less than 6 months to do a series of 24 drawings in which I said, these have nothing to do with the poetry. And he said, Barbara, you're crazy. And this is Cleopatra, one of the Cleopatras of the Cleopatra series that are made from plaques of bronze that are individually cast and then sewn together with copper or gold thread, and which also have silk elements to them. There are now 8 or 9 Cleopatras. The fact that I wrote, a poetry book about Cleopatra has nothing to do with the sculptures, except that it has everything to do with the sculptures. And the reason why I began the whole series was because Marc-Riboud was in China for the 2nd or 3rd time, and there were huge excavations going on, and they had excavated these 2 hand shrouds that were made out of jade plaques and gold. And he didn't even send me, he just sent me a letter with a description. He didn't even send the photograph. And it just lit up my life. And when I did see the photographs, one of which was on the cover of Art News, I decided that I was going to do this series of Cleopatras. On top of that, these stels were done for the Giacometti show in Paris last year, because every year the foundation selects an artist to make a kind of joint twin show with Giacometti and their collection. And Giacometti's most famous sculptures are the Standing Women of Venice. And so we did this dual show called, Alberto Giacometti, Barbara Chase-Riboud, Standing Women of Venice, Black Standing Women of Venice. And these are the Black Standing Women.
And I'm just curious about, because obviously you mentioned you met Giacometti very early on when you first arrived in Paris. And why were you interested in, what's interesting about the way you're responding to Giacometti through these sculptures?
I can say Giacometti was, a kind of mythical character. When I walked into his atelier, which was the most pitiful habitation I ever entered, I just saw this Ramsey, white plaster figure, sort of walking towards me with cigarette smoke, coming out of his head and his curly white hair. And I thought, this can't be true. But I met a lot of people in Paris that I thought, it can't be true. And voila, Josephine, who is either she's the last of the Musica series or she's the first of the Josephine series. This is her world premiere. And she is what she is.
Can you tell me what connects Barbara with Cleopatra and Josephine? I'm intrigued.
Bronze.
Bronze? Oh, can you tell us more?
My mother thanks you, my father thanks you, and I thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Woo!